This is a production of Cornell University.
I first met J. Robert Lennon, John, in a bar. Now I want you to see this bar because it's your favorite bar, in your favorite part of town, in the best city in your favorite state. I once met John in Alan Vick's bar on Alder Street in Missoula, Montana. Al's was a small, even tight bar, and I always imagined drinking there was what drinking in a submarine must feel like. The night I met John, he'd just finished his first novel. A mutual friend of ours, Ed, had brought him down to the bar to celebrate. But to be honest, John didn't look too comfortable being there. Our friend Ed bought some pints of Ham's beer and said, "John, this is George. George, this is John. John just finished a novel." And I realized in that moment I had never met anyone who had ever written a novel. I had many friends who called themselves writers. I called myself a writer, but really none of us wrote all that much. We spent all of our time in the submarine, in Al's, drinking. Years later, I was on a bus in Milpitas, California, reading a magazine on my way to work. In it, I found a story by J. Robert Lennon. I said, "Hey, that's the guy that doesn't go to the bar. That's the guy that stays home and writes novels. I got to read this." The story was called The Fool's Proxy, and the title alone, The Fool's Proxy, has stayed with me and my own foolishness for years. And in those years, I've come to revise my notion of the art of writing. I once thought the art of writing was the art of sitting on a bar stool. But through the crooked line of my education, I've learned otherwise. In fact, I've learned the secret. And the secret to writing is this: steal every sentence you can from the masters, but don't get caught. When I recommend John's work to friends and students, to bartenders and dentists and softball coaches, I do so with a particular specificity. I never go with just titles. I don't say, "Hey, you got to read Mailman" or "Pieces of the Left Hand." No, instead I say, "Look, you got to read the first 62 pages of On the Night Plane," or "read chapter 13 in the funnies in that outrageous scene where..." And I realize I've been doing this because these are the very pages and passages that I've underlined and retyped and stolen over the years. So as John steps up here to read, I invite you to steal what you can. Think with the imagination of a thief, with the cunning of a pickpocket. Think about what you can take from his work when no one is looking. John is a generous writer. He might just understand. It is my honor then to introduce J. Robert Lennon.
Thank you, George. That was so damn nice. This bar that George and I would hang out at the time that we would hang out at it, there were two groups of people who went to it: writers and football players, and it was really just not a good match. And I remember one of the MFAs, my fellow MFA students, innocently going up to the pool table, Fritz's friend Davis, and like putting down some quarters and saying, "Hey, can I play pool with you guys?" And they're like, they're already like have had about 8 beers, and after Fran won, which I think was his mistake, there was like this massive fight or a near fight, and then another guy tried to bite off another guy's nose one time and hid in the ladies' room, thinking the cops will never go in the ladies' room. And of course, he was right. They're like, "Oh, nothing wrong here." Anyway, I that was wonderful. Thank you. All right, so I have lots of brief thank yous, and I'm sure everyone will, so I'll keep them brief. But I want to thank the friends and family of Richard Cleveland for making this all possible. This is really a special reading for us because it's been, at least recently, has been a faculty reading. And my experience of academia before coming here was sort of people who intensely dislike each other in cinder block rooms separated by thin walls. And it's not, I was shocked and delighted to find it's not like that here at all. The faculty are friendly and respectful and interested in what one another are doing. And it's been extremely inspiring for me. I think it's a great environment to do work in. And having you guys as colleagues has been awesome. So it's wonderful to get to read with you. The first couple times someone stopped me and said, one of my colleagues stopped me and said, "Hey, I just read your book." I had to peek over my shoulder to make sure the ghost of Roland Barthes wasn't floating in the hallway behind me. But they were actually reading it. So the piece I want to, and I want to thank all the students for coming too. I've seen so many of my students and other English undergraduates and graduate students, and it's just great to see you all here. So that was all meta, by the way. That was my story, and it's called Introduction. I actually wrote this story a couple of months ago specifically for this reading. I was thinking, what is perfect for this audience? And then I wrote this thing. And then I had second thoughts, and I thought I should do something more serious. You know, it should be, I should do something faculty-y, you know. And so I then started writing a story about a teen sex cult in a fudge shop. And it got to be like 30 pages, so I said serious schmerious, and I went back to this, and I think it's the right thing to do. And the title is, I guess it's not even really a story. If I was highfalutin about it, I'd call it a metafiction, but it's what it really is a parody. And the title is The Year's Best Fiction, 2008. The Authors Speak. Gutman Klamath, The Epiphany of Palmer Weiss. The idea for Epiphany came to me while standing in line one morning at Starbucks. The man in front of me was typing out an email on his BlackBerry, and I suddenly thought, how would this fellow react if he suddenly got a message from his mother, who had died 3 years before? And what if that message told him to leave Starbucks right now and track down a certain vice president of human resources for a certain investment firm and kill him barehanded? And what if every day the dead mother sent this fellow a new email demanding that he kill somebody, and that each of these victims was some man who had wronged the mother in her long, tragic life? And what if then I made each of these victims have some unique occupation like candy maker and priest? And what if at the end the mother asked the fellow to kill himself because he himself had betrayed herself, the mother, when he married a woman she didn't approve of? And what if, in a final assertion of his independence, the fellow smashed his BlackBerry on the ground, then slipped on the pieces and died? By the time I finished my soy latte and lemon currant scone, I had my story. Jim Burr, Absence. I got to position this right because I got to do finger quotes. Absence is a reaction to the seemingly endless deluge of reader-oriented fiction constantly being published by the simpering, approval-seeking mass of semi-literate, so-called literary magazines one finds libraries and bookstores helplessly inundated with. One becomes horribly tired of the dreary conventions of the genre, plot, character, setting, etc., and wishes once and for all to not have one's hand held by some mush-mouthed, mommy-like author smugly leading one down the well-worn paths of storied cliché. And so one attempts to create a work unburdened by the in-name-only rules and conventions of literature and eschews the supposed traditional crutches of punctuation and grammar and the tyranny of standardized spelling. Absence was rejected by 172 self-described magazines whose editors complained that they didn't get it before Joao Houghton of Mumsimus finally got that getting it wasn't the point. One is grateful to Joao Houghton, to the editors of this anthology, and to one's dog, Bakhtin. Jamie Springbottom, Adriana's Wedding. It was while vacationing in Key West with my husband, the food photographer, Merwin Thanks, and our two beautiful children, Gary, an animal rights lawyer, and Felicia, now a sophomore at Amherst, that it occurred to me that today's fiction, with its dreary glorification of death, misery, and hatred, was insufficiently expressive of the great beauty and joy that is all around us. And so, as I paddled back to shore, for at the time of this realization, I was canoeing on the small lake we co-own with the architect Jeffers Paul and his wonderful family, I conceived of the most striking elements of Adriana's wedding, Adriana's beautiful hairdo and gown, the way her bouquet, drifting through the air as though in slow motion, appears etched against the sky's pale blue, the look of deeply committed love in the eyes of Hunter, her husband-to-be, and her lovely and respectful relationship with her mother, Paulette, which has grown into more of a mutually satisfying friendship than a mere mother-daughter bond. The story took about a week to write, as I did so using my great-grandfather's fountain pen, on pages handcrafted with a tabletop paper press by Jennifer, Gary's beautiful and thoughtful fiancée. I am grateful to the editors of the Canadair in-flight magazine, Drift, for taking a chance with my story, and to the Good Earth Trading Company for their wonderful line of delicious and self-sustaining teas, life-sustaining teas, which I sip with delight as I composed. Rupert G.B. Shipp, the assistant lion tamer's wife. Whence this shimmering urge, this shuddering desire, this longing? What makes us write? For me, it is the feeling of the revealing of truth, not the mere truth of saying what is so, but the truer truth of invention. This story was inspired by a trip to the circus, where I witnessed the profound vision of a lion tamer applying his risky art. And I imagined that he had an assistant, and the assistant was married, and the lion ate the assistant, and his wife was bereft. What then of the assistant's wife? Is she doomed to loneliness and grief? And what of their child, still unborn and quickening beneath the flawless, creamy flesh of her belly? And of her soft, round, full breasts, yet unsuckled by the rosy lips of her incipient offspring? What of them? It is the undeniable reality of such questions, conceived by chance, birthed by the imagination, for which I took pen in hand and scribed the glittering crystals of the unseen mind. Mackenzie Keene, Boomer and Hank. Through my dedication to volunteer work and to helping others, I arrived at the idea of writing a story that addresses our collective willingness to enjoy the silent and invisible nation around us, the homeless. There have been stories of the homeless before, but I decided to up the ante by wondering, what if my homeless protagonist were the second coming of Jesus, and nobody noticed? I went through many drafts of the story over many months, but it was my husband Phil who made the suggestion that changed everything. Make the story from the point of view of the dog, and make the dog be the Holy Father himself. After that, it was easy. The scene where Boomer Hank / father-son stopped to view the weeping statue of Mary Mother really touched me. I was crying at my desk. And it was my editor, Linda Goober, at the Last Prairie Review, who suggested the great scene where the friendly shopkeeper gives Hank the free bag of dog food, and he and Boomer see the reflection in the shop window, and the bag reads, "God doof." The story wouldn't have been the same without it. All right. Arthur Moridius, The Travails of Ezra Pound, that is, Ezra Pound. All I can say is, it's about time. Graphic fiction has been much in the spotlight these past few years, but scant attention has been paid to the much more difficult and far purer art of ASCII fiction. That is, graphic storytelling using only computer keyboard symbols as visual elements. As an engineer at IBM in the 70s, I invented ASCII fiction, and when I was laid off in 1983, I began to devote myself to it full time. This sad graphic tale of an ASCII poet and his search for meaning in a world that cares little for anything more challenging than emoticons took me more than 20 years to write, and if I say so myself, fully deserves the attention it is finally getting. If only for today, I no longer feel like the mime in a box that serves as Ezra Pound's signature. June Watts, 30 Below. My goal in writing 30 Below was to pull back the testosterone curtain of the privileged male-dominated publishing world and address 3 subjects rarely seen in contemporary fiction: sexual abuse, eating disorders, and stripping. The character of Candie is inspired by my sister Kelly, who is not anorexic, abused, or a stripper, but has gone through her own issues, including the same scalp rash Candie gets from a back alley dye job. Candie's cat, Percival, who survives being locked in Candie's apartment for 2 weeks after Candie's suicide by devouring his once beloved owner's forearms, is inspired by my own Mr. Mittens, who, though he's never had to endure such an ordeal, I'm sure would acquit himself wonderfully should such a thing come to pass. Candie's drug-addicted mother is not inspired by my own mother, in spite of her many emotional problems, but by her sister, my Aunt Mary. Her alcoholic pedophile father comes from some suspicions I have about our former neighbor, my high school chemistry teacher, Murray Whelm. And as for Candie's 3 tormentors, Q-Man, Lyle, and Backdoor Joe, you know who you are. Frederick Payne Paulus, 3 Scenes, Nova Scotia, 1934. Mr. Paulus declines to comment. Adam Stein Fowler, Man espies reflection in falling glass. Striding down a Park Slope Ave, about to step into the crosswalk, a glassmaker's truck passes before me, and loose comes the cargo, the plate glass tipping, then falling toward the pavement, and in that moment of vision, the brimming efficacy of impending destruction, the deadly potentiality of the mirrored surface, myself framed in the twisting, straining trapezoid like the bad guys in the Superman movie. There I stand, my tousled hair, my second-hand suit pants and tennis sneakers, my t-shirt bearing the name of an industrial lubricant, my eyeglasses, twin trapezoids of their own, themselves reflecting the reflection of myself. And in this moment, the story gushes from between the thighs of you femme, the inviolability of the instant, the repugnant weight of reflected selfhood, to be American in the 21st century, to stand upon the terminal moraine that is Brooklyn. Oh, Brooklyn, Brooklyn, my Brooklyn. The ludicrousness of terror, the terror of existence, the existence of the self, the selfishness of mankind. This is America, this is New York, this is Park Slope, my home, my enemy, my lover, my mother. And through the splash of shattered window glass I dash, back to my walk-up, through the door with its peephole in reverse, concentrating the wholeness of my apartment in its infinitesimal dot, past the teetering coat rack of Burberry cast-offs, over the threshold to the study, or beneath the Flaming Lips poster, beside the Charlie Tuna lamp, astride the paint-splattered swivel chair, I fling open my MacBook Pro, and out it flows, this refulgence of language, this vomited echolalia, my salivary testimony, my menstruation. The jizz of ages passes through me, and I come. I'm sorry, I just... Lionel Meeks, incident at 318th Street. This is all true, yo. It all happened just like I said. Zilch is me, and Yellow Man is my buddy Bo. And the times when killing got done, well, that's just how it went down. And if you don't like it, too bad, because it's real, it's street, and it's life. I want to give a shout out to my homies, my agent, Blurbin in your turban, Amanda Urban, my #1 book critic, boy from the hood, James Do What You Should Would, my main man, Sal Man, Boom Boom in the Room, Harold Bloom, Julie Kristeva, Forever and Ever, the cock jock of rock, Jacques Derry, da-da-da-dum, rest in peace, my once-a-weeko, freako, critico, Michiko Kakatani, Tommy, Tomcat, Lynchin, Pinchin, Right Till She Moan, Tony, More and More Sown, Abracadabra, Gift of Gab, Gabriel Garcia, Park It in the Fiction Market, Marquez, Donnie, Philo, Chillo, Careful Not to Spillo, DeLillo, and finally, the chairman of the boards, the original Globetrotter, Sir Mike It, Spike It, As You Like It, Mr. Bling Bling, Plays the Thing, the Killer of Fear, William, Shake and Bake and Take a Bow, Shakespeare. Word. M. Spackman Cone, the Frosted Glass Widower. As always, I am reluctant to demystify my art with one of these notes. But upon this, my 11th appearance in these pages, starting in 1958 with Why Harold Parks Rakes Leaves, I feel duty-bound to extend to you, dear reader, the small gift of my comments. I do so then in the form of a personal anecdote. Late last year, I found myself delivering a lecture at a certain institute of higher learning. It shall remain nameless, but it is one whose reputation has been sullied of late by its association with a certain reluctant world leader and failed businessman. And afterward, at an exhausting wine and cheese affair of the sort invariably appended to such events, I was accosted by a bright-eyed young person of writerly ambitions. "Mr. Cohn," he said to me, "my writing teacher gave my story a C- because I used dashes for dialogue instead of quotes." But Mr. Cohn, James Joyce used dashes instead of quotes, and he is one of the most celebrated authors in history. Why can James Joyce use dashes, but not me? "My dear boy," I replied with a chuckle, "because he's James Joyce and you're not." The poor child nearly choked on his braised pork medallion. Mr. Chimpers, black banana bad. Mr. Chimpers sad he not published story. Then story appear in compunction 34. Dr. Patterson show Mr. Chimpers compunction 34. Mr. Chimpers delighted. Now Dr. Patterson say story in anthology. Mr. Chimpers famous. Mr. Chimpers show world chimpanzees people too. Vivisection terrible crime. It kill Mr. Chimpers' friend Mango. It very bad. Mr. Chimpers prove Dr. Patterson brilliant cognitive researcher. Now maybe she get grant. Also, Dr. Patterson very attractive and single. Now she find mate like Mr. Chimpers did. Mr. Chimpers love Luella, a.k.a. Mrs. Chimpers. Story inspired by an experience in jungle before capture. Mr. Chimpers can still taste terrible banana. Mr. Chimpers grateful to Dr. Patterson for translation. Author's note interpreted by Dr. Gertrude Patterson, Ph.D., G. Patterson 31 at NITEC EDU, Monkey Girl 22 on MySpace. All right. One more. Jack Root, Feast of Blood. When I found out my story was accepted into this anthology, my instinct was to tell them to go to hell. I didn't become the modern master of terror by falling to my knees before the literary kingmakers, that's for sure. I did it by writing my hairy working class behind off. But my wife told me it would be stingy not to accept, and that the sales of this anthology were probably crap, and why not be generous and let them put my name on the cover, so I said okay. I don't have anything to say about Feast of Blood because any idiot can understand it unless they have an Ivy League education and start looking for allegories and metaphors and what have you. Hey, Harvard, guess what? There aren't any. It's a story, not a dissertation. Symbolism is for pussies. You read it here first. I do want to say something about fear, though, which is my stock and trade. Let me make it clear, this isn't a scary story. Here's a scary story. A soccer mom drops her kids off at violin practice, then goes home and cleans the kitchen so her dentist husband won't be mad. Or how about this? A guy wakes up, puts on a suit and tie, drives to work, has some meetings, makes a bunch of cell phone calls, then goes back to his suburban house and watches the Home and Garden channel. That's terror, America. Your fat, lazy selves being controlled by the Princeton-educated mass media. Compared to that, my stuff is a walk in the park. Anyway, don't be embarrassed if my story is the only one in this book that you actually read. Be proud. And tonight, sleep tight, my pretties. Thanks.